drugs that go on shortage usually are ones that are not economically attractive, right? There's a reason why they go on shortages because they're cheap. And so when you think about how companies like ours will need to raise funds for the production of these drugs, it would be very useful to have some sort of offtake for these drugs. And so that's where I think that the U.S. government can also be very helpful, is provide an offtake for these drugs that commercially are not very attractive.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Bayan Takizawa. He's the Chief Business Officer at CONTINUUS Pharmaceuticals. Bayan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for this excellent opportunity.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Bayan, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right, excellent. Again, thank you very much. I started off as a chemical engineering college, got my bachelor's in that field. But then afterwards went to medical school and did some residency training in general surgery and neurology. Ultimately decided that clinical medicine was not for me. And so I left residency, went to work at a small healthcare investment firm in New York, and did that for a couple of years before going to MIT and enrolling in a joint degree program called the Leaders for Global Operations. And it's a joint MBA in engineering. So I got an MBA as well as a master's in engineering systems. And during that time, was actually when the Novartis MIT Center for Continuous Manufacturing was happening. Now, I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But shortly after MIT, I joined a healthcare consulting firm called the Chartis Group, focusing more on healthcare operations. So working with hospitals and healthcare systems. So a variety of different things, but all centered in the life sciences.
Interesting. It sounds like you've had, an interesting path kind of leading you to where you are now.
Yes, definitely. And very different aspects of in the life sciences. But I think it's all been very beneficial. I've had no regrets.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So tell me a little bit more about, CONTINUUS Pharmaceuticals and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Sure. So as I alluded to just now, CONTINUUS Pharmaceuticals is a spin-out from MIT, more specifically the Novartis MIT Center for Continuous Manufacturing. And this was a $65 million joint research endeavor between MIT and Novartis. And there were other stakeholders involved, including the U.S. FDA. It's important to note that this was a very innovative white paper type project, not an incremental improvement project, really to develop the best way or method to produce small molecule drugs. So not looking at existing pharma technology, but looking really at how other industries have evolved their manufacturing practices and seeing what technologies are available. And so that was really the premise or objective of the Novartis MIT Center. It was a very successful project. They ultimately developed a process that we call, or to be a platform that we call Integrated Continuous Manufacturing, or ICM. And a highlight of ICM is that we were able to take a 200-day batch process, which is not unusual for the industry, and cut it down to just 2 days. So it was a pretty significant reduction in lead time. I wouldn't call that incremental improvement. I would call that more of a paradigm shift. And in addition to the reduction in lead time, we were able to demonstrate a significant reduction in cost of goods, in environmental impact. There was also an improvement in quality as well. So these are all important things. So that was the basis of our company. And just to provide a little bit of background, I'm going to try not to stray too far, but the problem that we're trying to solve, or the system that we're trying to replace, is a system called batch manufacturing. It's a very outdated way of method of manufacturing that is probably over a century year old. So very outdated, but it's pervasive throughout the pharmaceutical industry. And that's problematic because batch manufacturing is very time and cost inefficient. As I alluded to before, the 200 days not being unusual, but it also has quality problems. So you have a lot of rework that's being done. In addition, the way batch manufacturing is done right now, it's very fragmented. So after each step, you have an intermediate product that's stored, tested, and transported to the next step. And these steps are often performed by different companies operating in different countries. So it's a very long and fragmented process. There's often a lack of coordination among these companies. As I said before, a lot of rework gets done. There was a study that showed that approximately $50 billion a year is lost due to these inefficiencies. And we think it's actually more. So with ICM, or integrated continuous manufacturing, we remove all the stops and starts, and we integrate everything into a single seamless line. So you get rid of, remove all that fragmentation, and we're able to then have a much faster manufacturing system that allows us better control of the process, and say it also enables better quality. And we think that this could be really a technology that could solve a lot of the problems that we're encountering today, for example, drug shortages and these quality issues that I talked about.
With all of these benefits, why hasn't the pharmaceutical industry fully embraced the continuous manufacturing?
That's a very good question. I would say that there definitely is a change. So more and more companies are starting to initiate programs in continuous manufacturing. I'll just give a couple examples. One is Sanofi, so they're a global pharma. They recently moved to use continuous chemistry as the default for when they develop small molecule drugs. So that's a nice step in we believe the right direction. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, right here in our backyard in Boston, they have a handful of drugs that are approved that have significant continuous manufacturing components. But the way these companies are doing is a little bit different from what we're doing. They have more of a targeted approach. So they're looking to implement continuous manufacturing for part of that entire manufacturing chain. Whereas our strategy is really more broad to do continuous manufacturing from start to finish. That is to include both the manufacturing of the API, or active pharmaceutical ingredient, as well as the drug formulation, and put that all under one roof. You remove a lot of the inefficiencies, the manual handoffs, places where there can be quality infractions, and also these steps, these stop and start steps that not only take time and cost money. So there is a movement within the industry. We've seen it throughout the years, whereas companies in the past that have not been interested in talking with us, they're now much more interested in engaging with us to varying degrees, looking at our technology and how we approach manufacturing. So, I think that there definitely has been a movement toward continuous manufacturing. I think the industry knows the challenges and limitations of batch manufacturing. But I think there's still you still have some work to do.
Mm-hmm. What challenges has Continuous Pharma, encountered in this, journey for them?
Yeah, so and we've definitely had our challenges. I would say one, some of the challenges that we had first with all these companies that major pharma with their internal continuous manufacturing efforts. Sometimes it's hard to compete against internal efforts because they have their own stakeholders, their own key opinion leaders within the company, and they'll have a different strategy, for example, than we may have. As I mentioned, sometimes it's targeted versus what we believe will bring out most of the value or the true value of continuous manufacturing. So there's that component. Another major challenge is that there's a lot of existing batch infrastructure already out there. So there's this excess capacity that we have to compete with. When we think about our manufacturing lines, we will have to build them out. And so it'd be more like a greenfield project. And so it's challenging to compete against facilities that have already been built. And we'll talk a little bit later about how the U.S. government can be involved there in terms of some of the initial projects or the build out that would be required. I think there are other challenges as well. Culturally, a lot of folks within manufacturing have been doing it via the batch method for decades, and so getting them to change how they manufacture or how they do things is difficult. And along those lines, I would add that the way companies are built, there are a lot of silos, right? And so one of the, as I mentioned, one of the things that we like to do is really think about the entire manufacturing process, but that's difficult with large pharma who may have a specific group working on certain aspects of engineering or of the manufacturing process that don't communicate, with their counterparts, for example, downstream. So there have been some challenges, but as I mentioned, we've seen more and more interest in our companies and partners who were not interested in the past. And I would say that we've also learned from some of these challenges. So we've adopted some of our changed our business models. I'll just give a couple examples. The first one is that we, in the past, have not really been keen on selling specific unit operations or technologies to companies, but rather instead, what we were looking to provide more broader global solutions. But we've changed that. We realize that there are a lot of companies with interest in some of our proprietary technologies, and we see those as entry points for perhaps a larger discussion. And the second thing I would say is that we're looking to partner now with other companies that have some of the pieces that we don't have. For example, some of the commercialization experience and distribution networks. And in that way, we could advance our technology platform quicker so that a lot of the, I would say, technological risk that associated with a new technology like ours can be mitigated sooner rather than later.
Bayan, let's circle back to the point that you made about the implications for the government, because I think that's something that we should definitely dive into a little bit more. So talk to me about what government should consider when they're building advanced manufacturing capacity.
And that's a great question, because that is actually something that the U.S. government is currently looking at. And just as a side note, I would want to point out that we've been very fortunate to receive funding from the U.S. government. We received SBIR grants from the National Science Foundation, as well as funding from the U.S. FDA. And certainly, we're very grateful for those opportunities. We think we did some great work with some great stakeholders on their side. But unfortunately, we recently had to terminate a project with the U.S. Department of Defense and Health and Human Services. So that was very unfortunate. The project was to build out a commercial facility that could produce 3 generic drugs that are used in the treatment of COVID-19 and other debilitating diseases. So that was the project that unfortunately we terminated. And maybe it's in the context of that project that I could answer your question in terms of what we think should be important considerations from the government, and maybe based on some of the lessons we learned. So I would start off first by saying that the mission or the objective, we believe, is still critical. Although COVID-19 seems to have waned, their future pandemics are inevitable, and not only pandemics, but natural disasters, maybe even political strife, could cause more disruptions in our very vulnerable foreign-dependent pharmaceutical supply chain. So we think that the mission is still very important. I think we saw the exacerbation of certain drug shortages during that time, but that's always been a problem before COVID-19. There was a study from the New England Journal where they surveyed over 200 oncologists who regularly prescribed chemotherapy, and found that over 80% of them have to change the way they prescribe chemotherapy because of a shortage. So these are American patients who need their medications who are not getting them in a timely fashion. So again, the mission is very critical. The second point I would say is that although these although these projects have a sense of urgency because of their nature, right? COVID-19 is happening. We need to manufacture domestically these critical drugs. These projects take time, and when you're implementing new technologies, you can't really rush it. In a sense, I think that the project with the DoD and HHS was rushed, and that probably contributed to the unfortunate termination. But really, I think we have to think of more the long game and building out that capacity that would not only be able to help us with COVID, hopefully, but also future pandemics. And the final point I would make is that with these government initiatives, recently they're targeting, and in the case of the 3 drugs we selected, it was the case, drugs that often go on shortage. So drugs that go on shortage usually are ones that are not economically attractive, right? There's a reason why they go on shortages, because they're cheap. And so when you think about how companies like ours will need to raise funds for the production of these drugs, it would be very useful to have some sort of offtake for these drugs. And so that's where I think that the U.S. government can also be very helpful, is providing offtake for these drugs that commercially are not very attractive. So although the project was terminated, we still believe in the mission, and we'll be waiting for the U.S. government, or we'll probably proactively seek them out for other opportunities to develop this much needed capacity and capability.
Bayan, you talked a lot about the U.S. government, in this. Are there other governments that are considering continuous manufacturing?
Absolutely. We definitely know of efforts for example, many companies from Asia. We've spoken with several Chinese companies, or Chinese-based companies, and they have ongoing efforts on continuous manufacturing. I was just at a conference in South Korea, and it was all about advanced manufacturing. Much of it was continuous manufacturing. So I think everyone sees the value and how advanced manufacturing is really not the way of the future, right? We all have to reduce our costs and become more, have to develop more robust supply chains. So as we go to these conferences, it is reinforced the importance of advancing the state of pharmaceutical manufacturing. We just hope that the U.S. can continue to be a leader.
Bayan, you started to talk a little bit about this, and I really want to drive this point home to our listeners. I want to make sure that, our listeners really understand how the adoption of continuous manufacturing will affect their everyday lives. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's really the mission of the company, and really what we've been talking about, and what ICM can do is really getting the drugs to Americans when they need it, and at an affordable cost, and with the assurance that they're the highest quality, that there's not going to be any issues with contamination, for example. So that's what we believe ICM can do. We can do that through reshoring the manufacturing of critical drugs. We think that ICM would be ideal for this effort. It's fully automated, so it requires less personnel, and labor costs in the U.S. are expensive. It's a lot more technical, and its environmental impact is much less than a corresponding batch process. So these are all elements that make it ideal for any sort of reshoring effort in manufacturing. So with that, and with that implementation, in addition to getting the right drug at the right time, we believe we could reduce the number of shortages, as I mentioned before, and also bring very technical and robust jobs, manufacturing jobs, to the U.S. I would also add one other point. With advanced manufacturing, if you couple that with our drug discovery engine, which is amazing in the U.S., we believe that we can really complement or even improve upon those efforts. And so improve drug discovery, be able to produce better drugs, accelerate timelines, get drugs that are in development into patients quicker than they are right now. And so I think that these are all ways that Americans will benefit from the implementation of not only ICM, but other advanced or continuous manufacturing efforts that are out there.
I think that's fantastic. And I really appreciate you breaking that down, so that the everyday listener can understand, the impact that, this has on, everyday Americans. So, as we start to wrap up this conversation, what's the vision for Continuous in the next 10 to 15 years? What's on the horizon?
Well, we're very optimistic. We've seen, as I mentioned, a shift in interest or an increase in interest in continuous manufacturing. I would say a major stakeholder / proponent has been the U.S. FDA, the main regulator, even though they have to maintain a non-biased perspective. They really have been encouraging companies to adopt advanced technologies because they understand how we can improve patient access with better manufacturing methods. And they've issued guidelines that mitigate this risk, that provide information to pharma companies on how to adopt advanced manufacturing. And they've also developed teams that help shepherd these new manufacturing processes when drugs submit, or say when companies submit their drug applications. So very optimistic. We believe that continuous manufacturing is going to be more mainstream with with drug development. I mentioned as an example Sanofi and how they're using continuous synthesis as the default for new drug development. And we believe if companies like Continuous are successful, we can increase the number of new drugs, small molecule drugs being developed with continuous manufacturing, maybe to 50%. We also think in terms of the vision, being able to reduce the number of shortages, being able to develop a more robust American pharmaceutical supply chain, and equally important, really get better environmental stewardship with this industry. And that's also very important. So yeah, we're very hopeful and look forward to being a part of this effort.
Bayan, I think this has been an absolutely fantastic, very insightful conversation. I appreciate, you diving into all the implications for the government, different considerations to be had. I think this was very insightful, and I really appreciate you being on Business Ninjas today.
Again, thank you very much for the opportunity, Kelsey.
Yeah, great to have you.
Thank you.